Hello and welcome back to ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia McLeod. On this week's episode, Lisa Moneymaker, SVP, Head of Strategic Customer Engagement at Medidata Solutions, and Adam Aten, Legislative and Regulatory Policy Lead at Verily, joined me to discuss how the clinical research industry must use insights from the past to better prepare our AI models and other technologies to meet the needs of patients in the present and future. They dive deeper into the role that collaboration between technologists and clinical scientists can play in helping to reduce bias in our AI models, what legislators and regulators should keep top of mind as they write new rules of the road for AI and ML, and ACRO's ongoing efforts to promote the responsible use of AI in clinical research. Enjoy. So Lisa, Adam, thank you so much for joining me today on this new episode of ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. We're very excited to have you guys here to talk all things AI. It really is, and has been for a while now, a hot topic in the industry. So there's lots to unpack here. I hope today we get to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're seeing in the industry and then kind of pulling in that policymaker and regulator piece and kind of give our listeners a real holistic view of where we're at and where we want to go. So I figured today, maybe Lisa, I'll start with you. You did a talk last year at Innovation Network Gathering, this big meeting in Pennsylvania. You mentioned in that talk that old problems in our old data will create new problems in our new processes. For listeners who were not able to catch that talk, though I do believe it is available online, so if anyone wants to watch it, they should. Do you mind diving a little bit deeper into that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So really what we're touching on is our clinical trial history is a complicated one. When we look at the history of inclusion, and by that I truly mean who was included in the clinical trial, we see that historically women have been underrepresented in drug research, as have minority groups. And without getting into the many reasons why, this simply is a fact and the data reflects this. So not only that, we know that fixing this is great for the bottom line, for drug development companies and for society. Models show that if we were to narrow the medical outcomes gap by even 1% among those historically underrepresented groups, we would save society as a whole over $100 billion in the next 25 years. And that's if we just solve it in diabetes and heart disease. And it's not to say that there aren't efforts underway to remediate this. There absolutely are. And we know that the science behind our trials will be better and more complete when the populations being studied are reflective of the populations that we wish to serve. But this is where it gets more interesting. Our AI models are only as accurate as the data that we train them on. So studies have shown that algorithms trained on data that is over or under representative actually amplifies that bias into the resulting algorithms. So let me give you a couple examples that illustrate that. There was a study on AI-assisted image analysis, and in the training data sets, images of cooking were 33% more likely to be associated with women than with men. So the data itself was a little bit biased. But the resulting models were 68% more likely in their predictions to associate cooking with women. So the models, they learned a bias in the data, and then they doubled that impact into the predictions. And the higher that original bias, the stronger the amplification effect. And this moves even further because studies also demonstrate that when we as humans interact with an AI model that introduces a biased prediction, that bias can persist in how we actually behave even after we've stopped interacting with the program. Another example that exists in the data that we use to train large language models. So there's a history in our clinical trial conduct that is around exclusion of individuals on HIV preventative or HIV positive treatment that excluded them from participation in clinical trials and literally written into the exclusion criteria. And this dates back to the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and it's based on old, outdated science. But that practice persisted long after the science discredited it, in large part because in writing protocols, our medical writing teams often copied and pasted from past protocols. So there's this ongoing effective campaign right now to stop that copy and paste practice. But today we see companies looking to bring generative AI and large language models into the medical writing space. And large language models predict what they should write in response to a prompt. based on the training data and what was usually written in that context in our historic data. So we run a tremendous risk of perpetuating, again, that old outdated science in our predictions unless we can put the necessary controls in place based on our understanding of where there may be bias or where there may be underrepresentation. But we have to know when we have to look and we have to control for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot to do here. So I'm really glad we've got you guys here. I think that's a great setup for our conversation today. Adam, maybe I'll toss it to you. What do you see when you think about, training models today and the data that we're using? What do you see as sort of the top things the industry should be considering?
Well, yeah, I think building on Lisa's response, she's hitting all the right points, and we really do need to be intentional about the types of problems that we're looking to address. And as with other technological solutions that we've seen over time, technology isn't necessarily a silver bullet. You really need to ruthlessly understand the problem that you're trying to solve. You need a deep understanding of stakeholder perspectives, from the customers and regulators, et cetera, throughout the healthcare system to best address, what we like to call the who and the what, the why, the where, the how questions, and framing out these problems and developing solutions for them. There's a right size, and not every size fits the solution or the challenge that you're trying to address. And at Verily, we found a couple of different promising areas where that niche specifically for AI seems to be proving a lot of potential and possibilities for. One of them is digitizing clinical trial protocols. We are seeing that we can potentially speed up the speed time to start up trials by 70%, actually. And when we're leveraging large language models, again, to take the paper and the protocols, these massive binders of paper, get them into some type of more usable user-friendly graphical interface where the data and the protocol can be easily viewed and managed over time. And so this is an area that, again, where we've seen a lot of support, a lot of excitement, and we want to continue to build upon. So another area that we see rich for opportunity is clinical trial and patient matching, with the data that's coming in, and understanding the protocols and being able to kind of link patients to the types of trials that would suggest, a better care journey for them as part of their care delivery. Another bucket here is we need to be mindful of the patchwork of policies that are starting to take place because we don't have federal legislation yet. So of course the market's not going to wait. Innovation's not going to wait, and the regulators and the states have been stepping up to do what they can based on, for the most part, existing authorities and within the current paradigms that they have in order to address these new and interesting opportunities that this technology allows for. So, just quick background for the folks tuning into this podcast. FDA has really had a rich background in developing guidance and thinking about these types of challenges, these regulatory science challenges, and how to apply them within their existing framework. So, the different centers, the CDRH, the Medical Device Center, is one of those areas in which they've taken a lot of what they've done on the medical device side. Now you're starting to see AI-enabled medical devices and applying, what does software as a medical device look like? How should that be regulated when we're seeing that come through? What about predetermined change control plans? How far can an algorithm drift before you trigger perhaps a new approval process? And so they've been thinking about that a lot. CDER just recently, in collaboration with CBER, the Drug and Biologic Centers, have also issued a guidance, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the podcast. But again, trying to think through what are these opportunities that they have as regulators to start stepping in, providing some certainty for innovators in using this type of technology. And then, of course, with the states, we're seeing lots of bills show up. So again, it's a lot of complexity, a lot going on. There's a fast pace, and it's exciting times for sure. So really, just to kind of wrap up, fundamentally, we need to continue to move towards a common vision of what this all means. And, there's a lot going on here, but we need to have a larger framework around responsible use, around what is appropriate for AI, and really understanding how the mechanics should work. Things like source data, as Lisa was getting to, the validation techniques, how do you ensure post-market surveillance and continued monitoring for these algorithms to mitigate drift and things of that nature. So again, lots of opportunities, lots of work to do, but really exciting.
And yes, Adam, you were correct. We are definitely going to get into the regulatory stuff. It wouldn't be an ACRO podcast if we weren't talking about how we're interacting with our regulators. But you both have talked a little bit on data, and obviously the data piece is huge when we think about AI, but I want to make sure we're thinking about the people piece as well, and how people interact with data and how people build these models in the background, all that good stuff. So Lisa, maybe I'll start with you, and then Adam, please feel free to jump in. What do you see as the role between technologists and clinical scientists and that collaboration? How does that play in helping to reduce bias in our AI models?
Yeah, I think it's a critical piece. I mean, from a practical standpoint, Adam was talking about, there are no silver bullets, or, there's always, or they can be these certain ways that we look at it. I was coming at it from the perspective of sort of sometimes there's this tendency now to be standing there with AI as a hammer and everything looks like a nail, right? We're looking for places to bring AI and ML into our technology stacks. But I think it's really important that companies, first of all, are assessing, is it the right tool for the problem at hand? And in solving that problem, am I actually improving the lives of my end users? We know that bringing AI into these different systems isn't free. It's a expensive technology. It is, having challenges with sustainability behind it. And so making sure that we're making the right fit between it. From a training perspective, do I need a general model for the work I'm trying to do, or do I need a more clinically specific one? And as we get into those clinically specific models, what's the data, as you suggested, that I'm using to train it? What are the potential pitfalls within that data? Is the data blind to certain populations or perspectives of data? And what's the intent of the model that's being built? How will it be used? And is the data representative to meet that goal? Because oftentimes, I think, unfortunately, the people that can answer those questions are not sitting together, and they may not even work for the same company. And just as it's not expected that our clinical scientists know how to build and train AI, we may not necessarily expect our technologists to be experts in the history of clinical trials and clinical data. But we do need to figure out how to foster this communication better about that clinical significance of the training data and how well it fits with the type of discoveries that we're trying to make if we're really going to get this right. And, on the technology side and in technology companies, we have methods to programmatically reduce bias in the data. But we have to know it's there, and the technologists don't always know that. And what we can do is we can foster that communication to know what we're looking for within those data sets. I think if you have companies in, Medidata is certainly one of these with a really deep history of data within our systems, we have that broad knowledge of what is there and what we're looking for. Some other companies are needing to collaborate together and looking to bring data together in those data sets to be able to create a lot of these training sets. But even then, still having a really rich understanding and that right subject matter expertise as we're working with our customers, or even within a company themselves. We know that sponsor companies, we know that CROs are looking to build their own models. It's not always in conjunction with a vendor that's maybe bringing one to them. And so they may still sit on different sides of the aisle. You may still have your clinical scientists sitting on one side and IT sitting on the other, both trying to work together to solve a problem, but maybe not understanding the perspective that each brings. And so I think that it's really important that we are fostering communications about, again, what am I trying to achieve? What's in the data that's going to be used to try to achieve that? And is it representative of the end goal? And if not, what are the methodologies that we can bring to create more balance within that data? Sometimes it's programmatic applications. Sometimes it is going and getting more data that may increase that representation. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of creating the sorts of data pools necessary that can really get us where we want our industry to be long term. But I think there's steps we can take in the middle as we're exposing folks to what are some of the possibilities that then get those neurons firing as we're thinking about bringing new technology to bear.
Yeah, Adam, any thoughts there on, those kind of collaborations and breaking down those silos, which I feel like we talk about a lot in clinical trials in all kind of areas. It's something I think we're all working on.
It's really interesting. That's an absolute critical part of what this is all about are the collaborations, making sure that you have the technologist, you have the data expertise, you have the clinical expertise, and also, of course, as you had mentioned in the question, the patients are a real important part of this as well. So, not to go too much into past history, but I love the opportunity to do so. So I will go ahead and take that liberty right now. You think about where we've come as a country in developing a national health information infrastructure. This honestly, one of the big policies enacted was through the American Recovery Reinvestment Act that authorized the Meaningful Use Program to get certified health information technology adopted across the U.S. and to digitize the healthcare system. Lots of efforts with data standards. We have come a long way, but still there's still fragmentation, there's still problems, there's still barriers to ensuring that relevant and reliable data is accessible and timely enough to impact decisions. So where do we go from here? And I think, alluding to what Lisa was saying, it is these collaborations and making sure that all the different perspectives are at the table in order to build a more fundamental and comprehensive way of not just building these technologies and models, but deploying them as well. So, one of the areas that I like to highlight, that we're very proud at Verily is one of our solutions called LightPath. And, this is where we are, bringing in personalized AI-powered chronic care and making sure that, folks and their care pathways as part of having potentially diabetes, obesity, hypertension, the cardiometabolic types of conditions, have the right recommendations and the insights tailored to them and their need in their current state, and what they can do with that, the types of innovations that they need. And sometimes that might mean maybe it's helpful to get on these really interesting GLP-1 medications for weight loss or obesity management and diabetes. Other times it's how can we better drive adherence? How can we better drive behavioral change? And again, this is holistic. It's not just one data source. It's lots of data that's coming in directly from the patient, perhaps through secondary data sources, the electronic health records, the claims databases, the registries, so on and so forth. And how do we pull that together for this type of real insight to unlock precision health? And ultimately, it's this is all about individual people. We're not statistical patients. We shouldn't have statistical care. It's about unlocking this power of precision health and making sure that the services and products that are needed by patients at a given time are available.
On the spirit of collaboration, I figure we should for sure talk about the ACRO comment letter that we submitted back in April. Adam, I think if I remember correctly, you were on that drafting group with our AI working group. So do you want to walk us through our comment a little bit? This is a great example of ACRO members collaborating, so I figure it's a good time to talk about it. We did a similar comment to the FDA back when they released their discussion paper, and then we recently got an actual guidance document, and so we just wanted to make sure, we were spreading the word about what our ACRO members are thinking about and keeping top of mind as we talk to regulators about how we really get to a place of innovation and safety and all those things that we love with AI. So, Adam, the floor is yours.
Well, Sophia, as you know, ACRO is a trusted leader in the regulatory science and medical product development space. AI, but historically speaking, lots of guidance, lots of great ideas that have come through this organization. So I'm very, very proud to partner with ACRO and all of the good work that you all do in developing this. So, all in all, the FDA guidance that you're referring to that was issued by CDER and CBER, along with some other collaborating partners at FDA within the agency, we thought this is a really good first step. Was the general feeling where this is going? It's the guidance talked about opportunities to provide general guidance to industry for product safety and effectiveness, and leveraging AI to ensure as part of the submission process with these medical products, when AI is used, how this might determine or impact these reviews and what the agency might be looking for. And foremost, this is premised on this risk-based credibility assessment framework that FDA published as part of the guidance. And they go through this really elaborate and articulated step process in thinking about how to leverage this type of technology and what type of impact it might have on outcomes as you go through the approval process. And so I think the broad strokes were there is what the committee and generally speaking ACRO members felt like. But of course, as you know, it comes down to the details, and we're still developing some of that experience at FDA and understanding how to regulate. The applications, the context, the questions that you're trying to address matter, and so that's where we were going to kind of have this continued, okay, FDA, what do you think? Industry, what do you think? And as everyone figures out how to apply this. But some really good examples here that I wanted to highlight, this concept of transparency. Obviously, all the stakeholders are very in tune to transparency and explainability and making sure that how these models are being used and what the capabilities are is communicated in a way that's understandable and meaningful to both patients and providers. However, at the same time, it takes a lot of documentation and understanding how to assess the potential risks and the development of these models and how they're being used. And so one of the big questions for industry is like, how do you document this? How do you communicate this to the FDA as you're leveraging these AI related technologies as part of the medical product development process? So with some examples, and I think that's one of the key takeaways from the letter, could we have some examples how this might be applied? And there's a few areas that we're really interested in, hope the FDA might think about providing some additional detail. But, one is, what is the model risk and its influence on, outcomes? What are we thinking about from an FDA perspective on that? How do you apply this risk framework when you have a human in the loop? Meaning it's not just the AI, but you also have a provider, doctor, nurse, whomever that's involved in the use of the algorithm. And then, what does good look like with respect to life cycle monitoring? I mean, these algorithms get out into the post-market setting and they're continuously being used. And to the extent that we can continuously track their use and making sure that they are being within the realms of the approval of the medical product being leveraged, and that, again, you're not getting into too much drift related to these algorithms. So again, lots of questions that we have, but still we do think this is a good first step in painting the broad kind of goalpost of what you should be thinking about in developing these submissions with AI for medical product developments at CDER and CBER. And look forward to continuing to engage with the FDA.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic effort that the team has gone through and that, FDA has been open to the comments upon. I think one of the pieces that we need to bear in mind as well, though, with this relationship as we expand it out, is both from a legislative and a regulatory perspective. The companies that we all work with and our own companies themselves, we are global companies working on global clinical trials. And to make sure that as we're taking both, policy and regulatory positions, there's been a long history of great collaboration across countries in what this means, because ultimately, as we are working with global countries who are looking to release global treatments, they need to be able to be applicable across a wide variety of legislative and regulatory standpoints. And we know for the best thing that we can do to help unlock innovation is to give clarity on these, because when companies know the boundaries and they know what there is to work around and work between, we're able to move much more quickly through those. And yes, sometimes they feel onerous, and sometimes we know we've got a lot to produce to sort of justify the move from intended use to, did it serve against that, and have we completed our appropriate validations, et cetera. When we know what those are, we can move swiftly through it. And I think that's the piece that everybody is looking for when it comes to our stance on AI within clinical development and clinical discovery and all the way through, as Adam said, to post-market. What does it mean to have clarity around that? And if we can keep those in lockstep to a great degree across countries and help other countries as well provide clarity themselves, then we are setting up a world where we can take these tools and bring them in safe and effective ways to help make things more expedient and to make our individuals in all of, the expertise and brain power that they bring to the table more efficient in what they do and help them solve problems better. But really making sure that we keep that in mind, that this is truly doesn't just stop at our own borders, but rather these are all global trials with global therapies.
Yeah, that global piece is so important. I think kind of similar to the silos issue that we talk about, we have to be thinking globally about every facet of the work that we're doing too, and just how we collaborate. Collaborate. It's the buzzword of the day, honestly. But so important, I think, to keep that top of mind also is what we're doing here in the US. How does that translate to what we're going to do when we run trials in Europe and everywhere else in the world? But you mentioned legislators, so maybe let's pivot to the Hill, going back to the US. But if we think about what our legislators are up to, what do you think legislators should be keeping top of mind as we're starting to write the new rules of the road for AI and ML? So I'll have Adam, maybe I'll have you start, and then Lisa, you'll bring us home.
Love it.
What should they be doing up on the Hill, Adam?
Well, as you know, there's a lot of activity that's been ongoing for the last over a year at this point, both on the House side and the Senate side. There's been some bipartisan task forces set up in the House, some digital health councils, and kind of aligned, well-aligned Congress members to kind of share what's important to them and their constituents, and start to get a voice out in terms of what are the important issues of the day as we think about regulating and getting national legislation pulled together for the use of AI. And of course, AI, it's not just healthcare that we're talking about. This is across industries. And it's really an issue that I think has been perplexing, and lots of education opportunities that I've seen and been a part of as well, and talking through what this all means at the end of the day. And so what's been great is the opportunity to engage and provide the feedback. And there's lots of opportunities to provide feedback up on the Hill. But to be able to continue to do that, let's have this engagement as you're getting these thoughts pulled together, issues clarified. Again, these broad strokes of what this might look like as a national kind of movement and bill that would be addressed at some points. Let's continue to have that dialogue. We really need to think about the challenges. What are we trying to legislate? In some cases, maybe authorities aren't there, and they should be, or maybe the authorities are there, and we need to make sure that regulators are leveraging the existing authorities in place as well. So a lot of different ways that you can take this conversation. One of the other, really important pieces, though, I want to highlight, and we talk a lot about the responsible uses of AI and these pillars of transparency and, explainability, and making sure that they are used in a way that is risk averse to the extent possible. However, it's not just about these models and, what Lisa was getting to. It's about the underlying data here that we really need to be tracking. And within this kind of data domain, there's security and privacy. There's other opportunities when you're thinking about how to kind of have the training data that's available. So the access issues related to that, consent, if in terms of the research world. And things are moving so quickly, and historically it's been silos. We kind of have our privacy hat on over here, and we've got our security hat over here, we've got cybersecurity there, and then the data expertise over here, the statisticians over there. We need to get everyone talking together and think about this more holistically, more fundamentally, and that might change the way that we think about some of these authorities as well. So again, not to get too far ahead of where we are, there's a lot of complexity in the system, but we need to have a lot of opportunities here to kind of come together, share ideas, and really think about what this looks like from an overarching framework perspective. In order to get the potential, and there is real potential in these technologies, utilized and realized, frankly. So at the end of the day, the data matters, as Lisa has mentioned. It needs to be unified. It needs to be structured. And we need to be thinking about the underlying data infrastructure in order to ensure that that data is moving, it's being used in responsible ways and accessible in order to continue the innovation that we are bringing forth and bringing to bear. So again, it's going to take many stakeholder perspectives coming together, lots of sharing and collaboration, and really looking forward to being a part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where, the baton gets passed, truly, and we hope that it goes with continuity from administration to administration because, AI has been an evolving space. That evolution, I think we can all recognize is happening faster. There are frameworks that were begun in previous administrations that now in our current administration need to sort of pick up. And I think we can all look forward in the next 3 years or so, the expectation of the rapid sort of evolution of AI during that time is going to hockey stick, is by all prediction. And so I think now is a time where we need to make sure at a broad scope level that we truly do have the right safeguards in place, the right frameworks to make sure that we are being responsible as a society and as technology within society, and what that means. And I think that's a really appropriate place for legislature to be playing and to be thinking about impacts on workforce and as Adam said, impacts on safety and privacy and security, and all of those are really, really critical. I also think it's an important area where that traditional handoff between legislation and agency is done really well and with a really good handshake, because the framework that's put in place from a legislative perspective should provide that guidance, but then ultimately how different industries take that framework and make sure that it is then specific enough for their particular industry, I think is that critical transition, and really goes back to the conversation we were just having before, is what does it mean to then take a really appropriate and well thought out safety and security framework, hand it to the FDA and say, okay, now within this, what does it mean for you? In the same way that they'll do in transportation, what does it mean for you? And in consumer packaged goods, what will it mean for you? Within our industry, the risks and the controls are going to look very, very different than they do in another industry's end user. And so that's where that handoff is really important, and that we are making sure that we understand those machinations, and that the consultation then with the impacted participants with that industry are a really key part of it. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I think, again, uncertainty is our enemy and the thing that we're all looking for clarity on. I think we're all going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable or comfortable in the discomfort, because the rate of change is so rapid at this point that anything that we put in place now is going to look different in a year. And I think that's key to sort of how we set up these frameworks is, are they evolvable? Can they move with the changing time? Do they put in place the things that we believe, but then also allow for us to iterate within them? And so I think staying engaged, having groups like ACRO play a part in it so that we can make sure voices are heard, and that industry is both looking upwards as well as consuming downwards, and that the agencies are hearing from us, I think is really critical. So an exciting time to be working in tech right now, certainly, and nothing we can kind of rest our laurels on, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. When is there not, honestly, these days? But it's been really great having you guys here to chat all things AI. Thanks for joining. Thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode, and a big thanks to Lisa and Adam for joining me. If AI is your thing, we have a few more episodes on the topic coming up later this season, and I'll see you back here next week for our next episode.